Hi there, it's Angela Lennon here from Wales. Today I'm going to show you how to turn a sketch into a more detailed painting which would be suitable to hang on the wall. If you've seen my previous video, we started off with the hydrangeas in the garden and we also went up the mountain to do a landscape. Those were done in watercolours. This session will be done in acrylics on a canvas board. So if it's something that you're interested in, I'll give you plenty of tips and guidance on the way, and I hope you enjoy the video. Okay then, look forward to seeing you later. Bye! Because in this landscape I have a lot of warm yellowy and browny hues for the dead reeds and the autumn feel. It's quite a warm finish that I need to apply as a top coat, so therefore I'm going to use a blue background which will be a good complement to the warm colours as a starting point. Here I'm mixing up a bit of burnt umber and ultramarine blue. I want to mix those two together, which will give me a bit of a dark colour, which will be used to outline the mountain ranges and the different various levels of the valleys and the formation of the ground throughout the landscape. On my palette I have a variation of colours. I have some cool yellows and some warmer yellows. So I've got chrome yellow and I've got yellow ochre. The yellow ochre being the one on the right, which looks a bit like a blob of mustard. I also have a little bit of cerulean blue there and white as well, and a teeny touch of red, and I will use various mixes of these to increase the move from blues to greens to yellows, a bit like you would see in a rainbow, and the succession of from cool to warmer as we come from the background to the foreground. I'm using a stiff hog hair bristle brush, which is very good for applying acrylics. You can easily wash them out with water and they last a long time. Use them for my oil paintings also. And I apply the paint, and I'm using the side of the brush very often and using quite a stipply motion just to create that sensation of texture of the reeds as we get closer to the foreground. I've skipped on quite a bit here. You can just see where I use those two colours that I mixed together for the just suggested sketch. You can see it on the blue area there, the lower part of the painting. I've mixed similar sort of colours and put them in the sky with some white and various greens and pale blues, working from pale to more colour saturation as I go from the background to the foreground of the painting. I will often turn a painting upside down or at an angle, depending on what paint I'm using. Watercolours, you can have the paint run and disperse using advantage of water. With acrylics, if you're doing a brush stroke in a certain direction, sometimes vertical brush strokes are far easier to do than horizontal brush strokes, and if you work from the top down to the bottom, you can get a cleaner, a thinner edge on the mark as you lift the brush off the canvas. And that's why I'll often use an upside down perspective when I'm painting. Here I'm using a lollipop stick as a tool to create some marks in paint that's still wet. It would be no good to use this process on dry paint. You have to have quite thick wet paint on the surface of an underpaint, and as you scrape through, you're leaving scratches and the undercolour is showing through. With acrylics, very similar to oils, you use a lot of white. In fact, you use about 3 times as much white as a colour than any of the other colours, generally because the colours in the tube are raw and they've got their full intensity of hue, and therefore you need to bring those, knock them back a bit, and knock them back with a bit of white. And what happens is you get a more natural colour formation, particularly if you're doing landscapes. Obviously, if you were doing a completely different painting, you would use the hues straight out the tube. If you're doing something like a cartoon, for instance, that's quite a good contrast. But when you're doing natural world, the colours are a lot more subdued, and therefore you use a lot of white. So when you buy your paints, make sure you buy 3 times as much white as you do the other colours. Once I put the warm colours in the foreground area of the landscape, I suddenly felt that I needed to cool off the mountains in the background, and I wasn't happy with the contrast. So I mixed up a light blue with some white just to create a finish on the mountain tips. And as you will see later on, I decided I didn't like it, so I used a rag to rub it off, and therefore you can see that I went back to a bit of previous work. So it's a trial and error thing with all paintings. I always have old rags available when I'm painting. They're used for a number of purposes. 1, to soften an area that's a little bit harsh. 2, to rub out an area, and 3, obviously you can wipe your hands with them, and also if I want to completely scrub out a layer that I've just put on, if I give it a bit of water and squeeze it, and I can actually rub acrylics off. It takes a little bit of work, however you do run the risk of rubbing something off that you don't want to come off. So it's a use that you can use, and it's a matter of practice. Using our rags in this situation with the acrylic painting is quite safe to just leave them on the side there while you're using them, and you can re-wash them and store them. However, if you're using rags with oil paints, and because you've got flammable liquids in there, they do cause a hazard, and they can in fact instantaneously combust, so I've heard. It's never happened to me. However, be sure to dispose of the oil rags carefully and responsibly. I'm sorry about the video quality here. I think there might have been a little loose nut on my tripod and therefore it is slightly wavering in and out of focus. However, I still think you can see the gist of what I'm doing. I'm replacing various areas of ground on the left hand side and re-establishing the areas that I lost during that rub that I've done with the rag. Adding depth of tone with stronger colours. I'm using less white in my mixtures. I'm using the raw colours in order to create some depth of tone, which is quite important when you want to show the undulations and the undersides of banks of reeds. If you look at the foliage in nature, it's often darker at the base because of the light. And often it's darker at the base because it's going to soil, and the darker hues also suggest the lay of the land. This little sheep track here is an area of ground that has been stamped down, and therefore a lot more of the underground mud will show through, and this helps us to portray this sheep track through the valley. When you're creating a painting and you've obviously been inspired, as I was, at the top of this mountain of the South Wales valleys, it's very important that you try and keep hold of what you liked about that scene. It was quite a simple scene of Pen y Fan and the mountains and Cornview in the background with a bit of a cloudy sky, and the majority of the scene was in fact the reeds and the layers of beds of reeds that drew my attention. And it's important that you think about what you liked about that scene and then concentrate to get those parts to be portrayed in your overall finish of the work. So the reeds were the important thing to me, and therefore a lot of attention is going into creating that structure and texture that I'm trying to achieve. Okay, it's only when I get to the foreground and the detail that I've swapped from the large hog hair brush to a thin rigger type brush, just to suggest one or two light reads against that dark foreground that I put in. That contrast is very important. Also, another technique I use is splattering, whereby you put thick paint onto a brush and you use your finger to splatter and spray paint into small little minute dots across the foreground. Incidentally, if you intend to use the splatter technique with oil paints, you should remember that the oil paints contain flammable liquids, turpentine and linseed oils and things like that, and you need to be careful that you don't destroy the natural oils in your hands, as white spirit is a thinning agent which you use in your brushes, and turpentine can thin the oils in your skin. So for health and safety reasons, you should put gloves on if you're going to use the splattering technique. With acrylics, they're water-based paints, so obviously they're less harmful to yourself and the atmosphere. At the final stages of the painting, I like to come away for a couple of minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour at least, to reassess the colour balance and see that I'm happy with the work. On this occasion I felt that the sky needed to be lightened up a little bit, so I put some white, some clear bright white clearer to the mountain tops, and was careful to blend that back in to recreate that feel of that sky on a rugged autumn type of day. So it's always good to look away, come back and then see where you want to take it, if you want to take it any further or if there's something you're not quite happy with. Give yourself a break from it and to see it with fresh eyes. I felt some chunkier reeds were in order, and also I thought perhaps I'd put in a bit more mud on that little sheep's trail, and maybe the suggestion of a few stones and rocks and rough ground also helps with the reading of the painting. I hope you enjoyed watching today's video. I certainly enjoyed showing you the techniques that I use in order to create a finished painting from a watercolour sketch. If you fancy having a go yourself, there's some other videos that you may find useful to watch prior to this one. And it's easy to subscribe by pressing the subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything, and just follow the links for YouTube. And then you'll get some notifications when further videos are distributed. Hope you enjoyed yourself and have a go at painting. Bye!